Welcome. We're very glad to start this podcast today. I'm Ryan Mecham here with the Utah Manufacturers Association, and I'm joined by Dr. Tulinda Larsen with UAMMI, and we're going to talk more about UAMMI and more about the Small Business Administration. So we welcome you here. We're glad that you're here. We're glad that you're taking some time and opportunity to learn more about what's going on in the Small Business Administration. So thank you for joining us. The Biden administration is taking a lot of efforts to outreach to disadvantaged businesses. And that's one of the reasons that we are on the podcast today, is to help you understand a little bit more about the mechanics of how the Small Business Administration works and what happens with all of that. So today, as I mentioned, we've got Dr. Tulinda Larsen, who joins us from UAMMI. And UAMMI focuses a lot on making sure that those with advanced manufacturing and advanced material needs are taken care of. It's a great initiative. They're partners of ours within the greater scope of the Utah Manufacturers Extension Partnership, or Utah MEP. It's an alliance of organizations built to help manufacturing companies around the state of Utah. So we're very glad to have you, Tulinda. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for hosting this. We really appreciate Utah Manufacturers Association's fabulous facility here so that we can help our manufacturers in many different ways.
Many different ways indeed. And I think that that's going to be a big part of our conversation today, is really to help how to be, really a lot. There's many ways to help businesses. And I think the Small Business Administration probably has a lot of arrows in their quiver that you might not know about. So that's what we want to make sure and take care of today. So I'd also like to introduce Marla Trollan, who is the Small Business Administration's District Director here in the state of Utah, as well as John Gigi, who was the Deputy Director of the Small Business Administration here in the state of Utah. Marla was named the SBA's District Director for Utah in November of 2017. As director, she's the Chief Executive Officer responsible for directing the expansion and delivery of SBA's various loan and business training services throughout the state of Utah. Marla has an extensive background in communications, outreach, and partnerships, serving at various senior level positions in multiple federal agencies, where she provided leadership and supervision of external relations, public affairs, media, congressional and legislative affairs, partnerships, state liaisons, digital communications, printing, and FOIA. John has been with the SBA for more than 30 years and was named as Deputy Director in 2020. He is responsible for development, implementation, and achievement of the district office's strategic plan. We also have on our panel today Paul Schneider, President of HIT Executive Consulting. Paul is a consultant to businesses looking for extra help for this in the certification process. And over the past decade has helped numerous companies, including your company, Tulinda, before you joined UAMMI. And I'm sure there's a great story behind that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had a small consulting firm before I joined UAMMI. And after 7 years of just kind of futzing around and not quite knowing how to become a woman business enterprise and what did all the terms mean, I came across Paul, and he was very helpful in putting together the strategic plan for my business. Because as you'll learn, to become a certified business, it's not just clicking the boxes.
Wait a minute. It's not just as simple as opening up an application, filling out the application, and going to town?
No.
Oh, goodness.
No. You have to have a lot of strategy. And of course, the SBA provides a lot of free services, but I needed somebody to be my coach. And Paul was excellent at executive coaching through my business strategy and where was I going. So it was great. So I ultimately received both the Woman Business Enterprise certification, and then I went on to that's WBE, and then I went on to the Small Woman-Owned Small Business, WOSB, for both of those certifications.
Well, that's excellent, especially since, with the Small Business Administration and a lot of things within the federal government, everybody knows there's lots of acronyms involved.
Yes,
so it's very helpful to explain that. Even in the manufacturing world, when we often talk about MEP, we're talking about the Manufacturers Extension Partnership, but boy, that's a mouthful. And so I'm glad we're translating some of these ideas right here. So that's fantastic. So, perhaps Marla, John, would love to have you guys give us an overview of the SBA programs that you guys have. And so could you help us understand more about the certification process that Tulinda's been talking about?
Sure, you bet. Well, thank you for the invitation to be here this afternoon, and welcome everyone. So I'm just going to briefly touch on our SBA contracting programs and our certification process, talk about the benefits and the eligibility criteria, as well as sort of the process. And then we'll open it up for questions at the end, and John will help out with those. So the SBA.
Sorry, along those lines, just for those of you who are participating then, so, feel free, there's a chat function. We're also going to take questions at the end. So please, form your questions and get ready for those. Sorry, Go ahead.
Thank you. So the SBA has, of course, our 8A business development program, and we call them our 8A firms. We have about 50 of them across the state, and we clearly want to increase the number of firms that we have. So we're hoping that we can get some business owners out there that are more interested in this program.
Okay.
Then, of course, we have our women-owned small business certification, our service disabled veteran small business certification, and then our hub zone certification. So the benefits of these programs.
Now, Marla, could I ask you a quick question? Because I'm sure that in federal government speak, when we talk about an 8A program, it certainly must reference some kind of statute, right? And so, what does it mean to be 8A certified?
Sure. Yeah. So those are socially and economically disadvantaged business owners. It may be minorities, it may be women-owned, veteran-owned, that type of thing. And so they all can qualify for the 8A program. So the benefits of this specific program is that they're eligible to receive federal contracts under a set aside. And what that means is there's approximately 23% of federal government contracts that are set aside each year for these specific programs. So our 8A firms would have special access to those contracts and would only be competing with other 8A firms. And some are of course, here in Utah as well. So there are other benefits of this particular program, including business development opportunities. For example, I have a business opportunity specialist here on staff, and all he does is work directly with our 8A firms and provide guidance and direction for them. And he does a lot of the compliance work as well. So there are specific criteria that an 8A firm must meet each year, which is submitting an annual report, and then we go out and do site visits and that type of thing. But
so if I wanted then to access that, does that mean that I have to get in there and apply and be accepted as an 8A? Then once I am, then that opens the door to the further help that you're describing?
Correct. And so I'm going to walk through the eligibility under that. So, but I just want to touch on a few more benefits. So those 8A firms also have access to joint ventures and mentor protege opportunities. They have special access to training, management and technical assistance, as well as guaranteed loans and bonding assistance. So those are the specific benefits under that 8A program. Now, to be eligible, a small business owner has to be at least 51% directly owned by a U.S. citizen who is economically disadvantaged. And what that means is a personal net worth of less than $750,000, a 3-year average income of $350,000 or less, or a total market value of their assets less than $6 million. And then the qualifying individual must control sort of the day-to-day operations of that business. So, you can't have, say, a co-owner that doesn't meet this criteria do your day-to-day operations. It has to be the one that's eligible and qualifies for this program. The business must be in operation for at least 2 years and show the potential for success. So that's the more criteria that they must meet. Now, Indian tribes, Hawaiian organizations, et cetera, are also eligible for this program. So that's kind of our 8A portfolio, but we also have our women-owned business, small business certification. And again, the similar criteria applies to that, where they have to be 51% owned and controlled by a woman. The woman has to do the day-to-day operations of their small business, and they must have a qualifying NAICS code. And then similarly,
and just for those who may not know what a NAICS code is, could you help explain that?
Yeah, so it's an industry code that, so when they go in and apply, they would say, for example, click on manufacturing, or, they may click on, construction, or whatever their specific industry is that they're operating in.
Wonderful.
So the same criteria applies to the women's small business certification as well, which is they have to be owned and controlled by a woman, and a net worth of less than $750,000. They each, if it's controlled by more than one woman, each with $350,000 or less in gross income is one of the criteria, as well as being owned and controlled by more than one woman, each owing $6 million or less in personal assets. Okay. Then we also have our veteran organizations and the certification for that, and 51% owned and controlled by a service disabled vet is the criteria, as well as that vet doing the day-to-day operations and sort of the long-term decisions for their business. The eligibility criteria for a hub zone is slightly different, where the business has to be located within a hub zone in the state. They don't have a time limit in terms of how long they've been in operation. So there's no minimum time in business requirement. They do have to be at least 51% owned and controlled by a US citizen. And then 35% of their employees have to be located within a hub zone.
So it sounds like one of the kind of the themes I'm hearing a lot is the 51% ownership plus operational. So it's not like you can just have, 51%. You've
on
got to
paper.
on paper. You've got to be actively
that's where
involved.
you have to prove it. You have to prove that you're controlling. That's where I'm sure the SBA has programs to help you with the proving, but that's where Paul was very helpful with me. And how do you prove that you are actually running the company?
Business?
You don't have a man behind you someplace.
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
Right. That's right. And of course, we do have our resource partners here in the state that can help you through the process. So those resource partners are funded by the SBA, and that includes the Small Business Development Center network across the state, or the SBDCs, as well as the 2 women's business centers here in the state. Their services are free to the public, and they can help walk you through the application process. But the application process for these to become certified for these programs requires have a registered DUNS number, as well as a primary and secondary NAICS code or industry code. And you have to be registered in sam.gov so that you can get access to those federal contracts. We do have—
Love it. Just a point to add there. I think that there's, if you're watching this and trying to follow along with the different things that you're being asked to do, there's, the DUNS number, the Dun & Bradstreet number is an important classification, but also some of you may be familiar with a SIC code versus a NAIC code. So a standard industry code, or the North American Industrial Classification System, whichever one. But the whole idea simply is that you're able to show what kind of business you are. And when you're interacting with the federal government, there's all sorts of things get classified by these categories.
And that's how businesses, governments find you. They type in a NAICS code, and then you'll pop up once you're certified.
And as a macroeconomist, you love this because that's how you wonder, well, how does the federal government know all this stuff about the businesses? Well, in reality, what's happening is that, according to the kind of business you are, there's all sorts of reports and economics that go into understanding what's going on to the broader picture of America. So that's why these codes are important.
Exactly.
Hey, you guys, we have a couple
Absolutely.
of questions really fast.
Okay.
Okay.
So one of them is, what % of contracts are set aside for 8A? And then the other one is, does the woman need to be US citizen?
All right. So I think the latter one might be an easier one because I think we mentioned that, but do
Yeah.
we need to be a US citizen?
Yes, you do. And so as I
Or
mentioned
the
earlier,
WOSB,
What's that?
or the WOSB.
For the, okay. All right. For the WOSB, you do need to be a citizen then.
Correct.
Okay.
so and as I mentioned earlier, 23% of federal contracting is set aside for this program, for these certification programs. Go ahead, Tom.
But I would add that for the specific programs, 8A, 5% set aside, women-owned business 5%, and then 3% for the other couple programs. So there are specific targets for each of those specific certified type firms.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So
Excellent.
do you want me to talk a little bit more about the women-owned small business program?
Yes, that would be good because it's
Okay.
not just you get your name on a list and you are able to be found. The SBA helps you with marketing and support. So yeah, that kind of support would be very, very interesting to hear about.
Yeah, and especially any examples. I mean, if there's some,
Yes.
we talk about, kind of the broad concepts of these ideas, but if there's some examples that we could talk about, I think that would really help those listening in.
Okay, so let me just walk through the process because the SBA just recently changed this process as of October last year. And there's no longer a self-certification for women-owned small businesses or those economically disadvantaged women-owned small businesses. There now is a live new portal set up, which is certify.sba.gov. And it's free online certification process. It's new. And typically in the past, the application process has taken about 4 to 10 months, with an average being about 6 months to get approved. Well, now through this new portal, we streamline that, and it's about 90 days from the time of submission of a complete package. So again, you'll want to make sure that your package is complete in order for that clock to start ticking, okay? As I mentioned earlier, you can work with our resource partners, the SBDCs, or the Women's Business Center on your application. PTAC also works on those applications for small businesses. And so, it is intended to be a streamlined process now. So there are some third-party third-party certifiers to obtain this certification, and I just wanted to mention these 4 because they're at the national level. It's the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the National Women's Business Owners Corporation, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Women's Chamber of Commerce, and then the Women's Business Enterprise National Council. And so those third-party certifiers can also help you with your application process.
Good to know.
Yeah, and so if you currently have active contracts, like say you're a woman-owned small business and you've already entered into the federal contracting arena and you have an active contract, you will remain certified through the duration of your existing contract. Okay, there won't be any changes there. But again, there is another site, it's beta.certify.sba.gov that you can go into and take a look at this process as well. And then I want to talk just briefly about the resources that are available. As I mentioned, there's the third-party certifiers. Out on this beta.certified.sba.gov, there's a fact sheet out there that kind of walks you through the process and helps to answer some of the questions you might have. And out on that site, there's access to checklists that provide guidance to apply. You can look at your company's eligibility and whether or not you think you would be eligible up front, answers some of the questions, so FAQs. And you can also request information from SBA program experts. So we do have a call line available too for quicker responses to your inquiries coming in. But basically what you would do is go out on this portal and create an account and proceed with the application. We also have a variety of free webinar trainings out there. There's one on the WOSB certification eligibility and application process. So there's a webinar on that. There's one on continuing WOSB federal contracting program, the WOSB quarterly process session, and then sort of a what's next webinar. You can also, of course, visit the Office of Government Contracting in DC, and their website is WOSB, or sorry, their email, WOSB@sba.gov. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of local resources as well. So on our
McKinley, do we have a question?
Yes, a question just came up in the chat box for you, Marla. Do certifications expire?
They do expire. I think it depends on each one. John, do you have the specifics on that?
There are some recertification requirements every 1 to 3 years, depending on what type of program you're dealing with. The
So
8A
pay attention to
program
the
itself-
details and make sure you
Right.
know what's going on.
When your expiration date's up, it's easy to renew. It's hard to start over. Well, that was an excellent overview of SBA programs. So we also have Paul Schneider, and he's going to talk about, besides government programs, what other kinds of programs with corporations and maybe state and local certifications. So I'll throw out to you, Paul, if you have your SBA certifications, is that all you need, or do you need to look into certifications at a different level?
Well, I'm going to give you the consultant answer of it depends.
Okay.
Oh, I've never heard that before.
So one of the questions I saw in the chat box was, does the woman need to be a US citizen? And the answer to that is it depends. So for the woman-owned small business, for example, you absolutely have to be a US citizen, and the woman who owns, manages, controls it has to have the ownership in hand. But there's national certifications, for example, with WeBank, which is one of the WOSB certifiers through the SBA, where you can have a green card and also apply for this and be WBE certified as a woman business enterprise. The 8A, I think, has a 3-year time in business requirement. Well, for the national certifications, there is no time in business requirement. But some states and cities or counties may have a time in business requirement. So again, it goes back to it depends.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it pays to know the details is what I'm
It
hearing.
does. So
Yes.
Paul, why do people hire your services?
So one of the reasons is they don't know what's out there, because as you mentioned, there is an alphabet soup of different certifications that are available. There are about 30 states that have a state level certification. Utah is not one of them. There are, multiple counties and cities. You could be in Texas and get 5 or 6 different certifications, including the WOSB and the Hub Zone and the DBE. But if you're in Utah, really the ones that are available to you are the national certifications and the Department of Transportation DBE certification. So it really depends geographically where you're located as to which ones you should consider or even be eligible for.
And then I think they also, if you've got a burning contract and you need to get certified fast, because you could lose this $1 million contract, right? Right, Paul?
Well, again, I want to say it depends. So depending upon whether you go through NBOC or WeBank or the U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce, the Department of Transportation. I know, for example, in New York, if you have a contract with the state of New York and you're applying for a Department of Transportation DBE, they do tend to push it a little bit more quickly. However, I don't know if that's every state. In Utah, I believe there's only one place to apply for the DOT, but in Texas, there's like 6 different places or 5 different places. So depends upon, again, it all comes down to, and we mentioned this earlier about the qualifications. They kind of go back to that 13 Code of Federal Regulations or 13 CFR 124 of who is socially disadvantaged or what's considered to be a socially disadvantaged group. And primarily it's not Caucasian men, but there are exceptions, you know, service disabled versus somebody who has a disability, hearing, sight, what have you. Those may qualify even though you are a Caucasian man. There are some circumstances where you may be able to, through a preponderance of evidence, show that you have been discriminated against or that you're disadvantaged even as that person, but you're not to be presumed. There are certain groups that are presumed to be disadvantaged, where if you're an African-American, Hispanic, Latino, if you are Asian descent, depending upon what country you're from, or if you're a woman, you're presumed to be disadvantaged. So it makes it a little bit easier to qualify that.
So let's talk for a minute about we've talked a lot about the what and the how to go about this. Let's talk about a little bit about the why. So, you know, as people would come into this, one of the reasons that you would perhaps entertain these ideas.
What's the benefit?
What's the benefit?
Right.
And so part of what we've heard is that there's more federal contracts available to you as one of these. What else? What are the other motivations, people you've worked with that are looking and say, hey, this is a really good idea, I think. Why should I do this?
Okay, so there are several drivers that are out there for supplier diversity programs. As you mentioned, when we talk about federal government contracts and federal government dollars that are involved at state and city and county levels, then there's an obvious preponderance of we want to hit a certain percentage, whether it's 25% in New York, 6% in Colorado, or whatever your requirement is. But the national certifications are really meant for publicly traded companies. They're meant for companies like Northrop Grumman or Lockheed, or some of those publicly traded companies out there that have supplier diversity programs. And the reason they have supplier diversity programs are because they're trying to meet ethical business expectations. That they have a commitment to ethical procurement. It's good corporate policy. It's good corporate optics. They're looking to grow their profits, economic impact, diversify their supply chain. They're looking to stay competitive, not just stay competitive with their customers, but also with their employees. People want to work for companies that are diverse, because we have a large number, especially in our demographics right now, of non-Caucasian, of brown, people of color, women who are entering the workforce. And to be a competitive employer that can hire these employees, you want to show that you are an ethical, that you have a supplier diversity program, that you are really trying to be inclusive. So as a result of that, they have got with WBE, NC, NBOC, the National Women Business Owners Corporation, U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce, and said, hey, point us in the direction of women-owned companies. Point us in the direction of the National Minority Supplier Diversity Council, of minority-owned companies. So they're looking at these third-party certifiers saying, give us your database. And as a result of that, companies go through and they get certified, and they have their certification requirements, and they really want to make sure that the qualifying individual is really who they say they are, which is why it's so incumbent from an integrity standpoint that we really are women or minority owned, managed, controlled companies. Because when CVS hires you, or when Microsoft hires you, or when Lockheed hires you, and you've got the WBE stamp of approval, that means that somebody did their due diligence and went in there and made sure, as Tulinda mentioned earlier, that you really do own, manage, control, that you have the knowledge, skills, experience, understanding to do that, and you really are a qualifying individual or qualifying company.
That's great perspective on that. Tulinda, I think
Yes.
you had some items to add.
Yeah, so very exciting
I
news
have a
here
little
in
bit of
Utah.
passion behind this, sorry.
It's very exciting news here in Utah is the Salt Lake City Chamber of Commerce released the Utah Women-Owned Business Directory. And you can just Google it with the Salt Lake City Chamber. And that really will help businesses find women-owned businesses to contract with for these diversity goals. I'm sorry, John, I think I interrupted you.
No,
But I'm glad, oh,
Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was produced through our Women's Business Center that is funded by SBA. So that is going to be a good tool for people to use.
Yeah, great points. Paul, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, there's a couple more things that we can kind of discuss. I know we're looking at time right now, but it's, people come up, they call me up and they ask me, why should I get certified? And, it really depends on the company. There are some companies that, when you're talking about manufacturing, you've got that 31, 32, 33 NAICS code that you are the beginning of that supply chain. You're either tier 1 selling directly to Boeing, or you're tier 2 selling to somebody who's selling to Boeing. So it's important that if you're looking at that from that perspective, that you get certified, because there could be contracts that have some diversity spend requirements, or they have internal diversity spend goals, and you're going to help them achieve that. If you currently have a contract with them and you get certified as a woman or a minority-owned business, well, now I can just double my order because you're helping me check my boxes. So I've seen that where people have gotten certified to get a contract. They've gotten certified so they don't lose the one they currently have, because it's being put out to market for women or minority-owned companies. And they're like, well, I'm a woman-owned company. Well, get certified so I can count you. Or they want to expand their reach into a market where they haven't been before. Or like I said, they have a current customer that's looking to increase their diversity spend, and you getting certified as a woman or minority-owned company, that's an easy win. You've already got a service agreement. You've already got a statement of work. You've already got the contracts in place. Now I got my WBE, my MBE, my whatever they're asking for, LGBT, disabled-owned business, and you're able to help them meet their needs.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And that really kind of describes, I think, the nexus of why we're talking about this here in this context between a Utah Manufacturers Association and UAMMI. We work with manufacturing companies all over the state of Utah. And some of them are absolutely exactly what John and Paul, you're describing about these businesses that yeah, they're up in the supply chain. They're supplying to others. Sometimes they're tier 1, sometimes they're tier 2, but they're most definitely out there working in the supply chain. And so a lot of those businesses, some things are very obvious, right? They think of, well, if I'm going to work in the aerospace business, I need to have my AS 9100, right? I need to have the aerospace 9100 certification in order to play ball, right? If you're going to work with a Northrop Grumman or a Boeing or any of those players, you're going to have to meet these certain, and a lot of people understand that, okay, great. In order to be in the ball game, I've got to get my AS 9100. And so we help companies at UMA, we help companies get their AS 9100. There are others that do that as well. But I think part of perhaps what's missing here is there's also then a subset of those companies that say, wow, I really have an opportunity as a woman-owned business, or I can, go through this process through the SBA, and that could also help me out in this competitive environment, because some of those corporations are looking at these diversification goals, and I could help them meet that as well. And
that's a good summary. Marla and John, I mean, on the UMA Board of Directors is Natalie Caddis at Caddis Enterprises. And she is our leading example of a woman-owned business here in Utah. Marla and John, can you talk a little bit about Caddis Enterprises and their successes?
Sure. So we worked with Natalie for several years now, and she actually won last year the Exporter of the Year, the Regional Exporter of the Year. for the Rocky Mountain region. So we're really, really proud of her. And that was an SBA award that she received. And it was based on her export sales and her marketing plan and that type of thing. I mean, we have specific criteria that we look at, but we're really proud of Natalie for doing that. And she, I know, plays a prominent role on various boards and things throughout the state. So again, we're proud of her successes, and we wanted to recognize her as such.
Yeah, great points. And, Natalie's a great friend of ours. I personally have spent a lot of time over at Caddis Enterprises working on their operations. And
What do they do?
Oh,
So for
it
those
is
who don't know.
so fascinating. So in fact, the last time I was there about 2 weeks ago, they were receiving an award from an organization that said, you guys, Caddis Enterprises, are helping to save wildlife, in specifically raptors. So for example, one of their products they do an end around a power pole. And so what they'll do is encapsulate within a plastic casting, basically, the parts of the electrical system where birds can interfere with, just simply by touching, two of the wires, and they get electrocuted. They, of course, not good. And so they've worked with the state of California and a lot of their entities to put on these end caps and other materials so that rodents and birds will be protected in the system. And they've gone, I think they're now into 14 different countries. And so they've exported to Mexico, they've exported, I think, down to South America and over into Europe. And so those are just some examples of a woman-owned business that has a product. They started back in the 60s, and this is the second generation of ownership, but they've taken those ideas and found a lot more markets to apply their ideas. So it's all about, in their case, thermoform plastic. So if you've got a piece of plastic and need to thermoform it in order to meet the needs of a customer, that's what they specialize in. And they found a real opportunity to work with utility companies around the country in order to supply those things to meet their needs. So, another great example about not just, hey, I've got a business, or I've got a business idea, or I've got a new market that I can get into, but we can do that as a woman-owned business. And she's done that very successfully now.
She's amazing.
She is.
She's on the cover of the SBA magazine this month. And that's why I knew Marla and John knew a lot about her business. One question is, how much money does it take? What is it? So 2 questions. One is from the SBA. How much does it cost to get certification?
Well, it depends. I mean, there you go. There's the answer.
Shout out to you, Paul.
Yeah, shout out to you, Paul. In fact, I could probably let Paul take this one. Go ahead, Paul.
I'd be happy to. So it depends. The way that woman-owned small business certification used to work is there was a self-certifying aspect, and of course, there was no charge. And when it went to the third parties, because to be honest, there was legislation that was passed back, I think it was 2017, guys, you probably know better than I do, and it was finally implemented last August or July, where there was no more self-certifications because they were trying to root out the possibilities of fraud. And I don't know if there's any numbers behind it, but ultimately they said we need to have a third party, go through this and verify this with. So if you're going through WeBank, the WBENC, NBOC, U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce, typically they're going to charge you, $300 or $400 or $500, usually sliding scale depending upon what the revenue size of your company is. And a lot of times when I work with companies, I'll help them go get the WBE, and then we'll also simultaneously do the woman-owned small business certification at the same time, because it's one site visit and it's a lot reduced paperwork, because otherwise you're doing 2 separate applications and it just doesn't make any sense to do that. So
you just slipped in site visit. So you do the paperwork, you do the strategy, you answer it, and you go through hurdles to get your certification. The last hurdle is they come to your office and make sure you're a woman running your business, not a man.
And not just pretending. So
Not
we're going to
just
see
pretending,
this actually
exactly.
happening.
Yeah, so they come And boy, was that nerve wracking. But I mean, I do run my business, but still the idea of somebody coming into my office and just verifying that I am a woman-owned business, that was a little
A
intimidating.
little
but,
intimidating.
but that's the last hurdle that you have to get through.
Gotcha.
Right. And Tulinda, that's actually a great segue into what does this process look like from a time frame standpoint? And when we start, talking about going through the certification process, the first thing we do is we want to make sure that the at least in my mind, the client is going for the certification that's going to benefit them the most. It doesn't make any sense to go for a DBE, for example, if you're an IT consulting, because you're not doing work with the Department of Transportation. If you're not doing any federal contracts whatsoever and have no intention of doing it, it may not be beneficial to get a woman-owned small business certification, because you have to go through SAM.gov, and that takes anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks to get into SAM.gov, to get the IRS tax ID number matching, to make sure you have a Dun and Bradstreet number that bounces back okay. It hits the Secretary of State. There's a lot of things that you have to do to even be able to apply for that woman-owned small business. But just typically it takes about, if I'm helping you, if I'm doing the project management portion of it for you, like for Tulinda, it takes about 4 to 8 weeks to get all the documents together, dot the I's, cross the T's. If there's errors in the documentation, let's correct those. Part of my job also is to verify that you really are a qualifying individual, because we want to make sure that you're going to be successful. You may have challenging situation with that you inherited it, or your husband gave it to you, or you bought it from someplace else, or you took loans out rather than capitalizing it yourself initially. But those are all things that we work with to try to figure out how to position yourself, because you own, manage, control the company. Again, 4 to 8 weeks. We submit the application. They take typically up to 90 days. I've seen it in 60 days. I have one right now in Maryland that's doing it 45 days. She's doing her site visit today. Then I've also seen it 120, 150 days. And that was with COVID, but I've seen it a little bit longer. But typically I tell people about 90 days. So 30 to 60 to get the documents together, 90 for them to review it. They can come back and ask questions. They can ask for clarification. Maybe the lease we sent expired between when they picked it up and started looking at it and when we send it in. They want a new lease. So they want fresh financials, fresh documents, license, certifications, things like that. They
And
then
what happens if you don't get, what if you're denied?
Well,
What
if
happens?
so with the WBE and C, they have a 6-month waiting period before you can reapply. Most everywhere else is 1 year, whether it's the National Minority Business Enterprise. I believe the WOSB is a year also, although it might be 6 months. The DBE is a year. So you have to wait before you can reapply. And the challenge is during that time frame of you waiting for your, because the denial is, what do you have to do to fix what was wrong?
Mhm.
And that's where they can get, sometimes they're very detailed in saying, this is exactly where you failed to meet our requirement. And sometimes they say, 1 page, you failed to show control of your company. If things change in the next 6 months, please feel free to reapply. And they get so many applications that the first thing that pops up, they go denied, and then they send it back. I've had people that have been denied 2 or 3 times before they reached out to help for me for help, because they found the first thing and denied them. Then they fixed that, but then the next thing tripped them up, and then the next thing. And the more you get denied, the more challenging it is to get through the process, because the more it looks like you're trying to make your company be a woman-owned business than it actually is a woman-owned business. But the site visit. So that's part of what I do, a coaching session, as Tulinda, you may remember, where we sit down for half an hour and review your application. These are what I consider some red flags or yellow flags. They're going to ask more questions about this area, or they're going to ask about this area. One of the things that I want to point out to everybody is answer the question, 1 or 2 sentences, and then stop talking. What
Wow,
we do
Paul, it's almost like you're a lawyer there.
one of the things we do as human beings is that we get nervous when there's silence. So we start talking.
That's
And
so
what that
true.
does is it leads people to ask more questions, and it leads you down a rabbit hole that you may not want to go down. So just
What
answer
are
the
some-
questions.
Paul, what are some examples of reasons that can you give anything concrete, where they say, well, you're not operating your company. Well, what does that mean in concrete terms?
Well, so let's say, for example, that you and your husband, you and your husband are running a company, and your husband makes more money than you do. He owns 49%, you own 51%, but he makes 100,000 and you make 60. Probably very explainable, but if you don't explain it, it looks like you're just doing the books and he's the one actually going out there and doing that.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
the optics
Interesting.
of that is also important. There could be control. 90%, you own 90%, he owns 10%, but it requires complete agreement of the board of directors.
Uh-huh.
Well, that means that his 10% gives him the power to say no to something. And they don't care how small you are or how large you are. Everybody has to jump through the same hoops because of the integrity of the certification process. And that doesn't matter if it's the woman-owned small business with the SBA, if it's the WBE, the DBE, everybody has to jump through the same hoops. And this is where it gets kind of crazy. And I tell people, whatever you see as the minimum required documentation is exactly that. It's the minimum, but literally they can ask you anything.
Gotcha.
Because in the Code of Federal Regulations and in each of the certified, if there's something, if for whatever reason you're reviewing this and it just doesn't feel right, you can deny a company just because it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I love it. So some of the key takeaways, and then let's open it up for questions to make sure if you've got some other questions, be sure and get them in the chat box so we can answer those. But it sounds like some of the themes are around the pay structure is one potential red flag, as well as the controller, the decision-making processes you have in your company could be another red flag. So be sure and
when
pay
you're
attention to that.
when you're on the on-site interview, you had better know your financials.
Ah, good
Yeah,
point.
you
Good point. So
better know. You can't say, "Oh, my accountant does that for me."
Ah.
They expect you to really.
So if
know.
you're, hence the connection with the operations, I assume, right?
Exactly.
If you're operating the business, everyone who operates a business is going to know what your
What the
cash
numbers
position
are.
is, what your numbers
Yeah.
are, what your goals
Exactly.
are. Great points.
Exactly. Do you have a question over there?
Yes.
All right, McKinley, what do we got?
So John in the chat box, he wants to know, could you address the 8A certification a bit more?
Okay. So any more details on the 8A certification? Was that addressed to Paul?
No,
Just in the
Oh,
chat.
in general. Okay.
It'd be to Marla or
Or John, yeah.
Yeah, do you want me to walk through the eligibility requirements again?
Oh, that'd
Is
be
that-
good. That'd be
Okay.
very good.
Okay, so again, this is for the 8A program specifically. So it must be at least 51% directly and unconditionally owned by a US citizen. Okay, so that first and foremost. Who is considered economically disadvantaged? Because again, it could be socially or economically disadvantaged small business owners. So on the economic side, it would be a personal net worth of less than 750,000. A 3-year average income of 350,000 or less, and then a fair market value of all of your assets is less than 6 million. Okay, so that's on the economic disadvantage side. On the socially disadvantaged side, it would be those who have been, subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice and cultural bias within the American society. This is kind of how we define it. Because of their identities and members of groups without regard to their individual qualities. So that's sort of SBA's definition of that. As I mentioned earlier, the qualifying individual must control the strategic direction of the day-to-day operations of that business. And the business has to have been in operation for at least 2 years and show that they can be successful long-term, okay?
Yeah.
The other key thing too, and I just want to note this, John, before you jump in, is an applicant and the participants in this program must possess good character. So, for example, we've had 8A firms that have been in the business for a while in the program. It's a 9-year program. And if they're not being responsive to emails from our business opportunity specialist, for example, he may send out emails to say, hey, your annual report is due. You have X number of days to get that submitted. If the business opportunity specialist isn't getting a response from the small business owner within a certain amount of time, they can actually be terminated from the program. So possessing good character is just, being responsive and meeting the compliance needs of the program. And as I mentioned, we go out and we do site visits. And I know that was brought up earlier, where you're going to have to, we're going to be looking at the financials and whatever, and making sure that your place of business is actually where you operate out of. So, for example, we've had some businesses that are operating, say they're in operation, but we go to their place of business and they only have an empty desk in a room or something. Well, that's
that
not
would be a challenge.
that's not meeting the compliance aspect of the program. And so those are grounds for termination. John, did you want to add anything?
The 8A program is a business development program, and it's a 9-year program. So you get into the program, the first 4 years are called the developmental phase, the last 5 are the transition stage. So by the time you get to that transition stage, hopefully we've helped you learn how to get non-government contracts as well as government contracts, so that once you graduate after the 9 years, you're able and self-sufficient to go out into the marketplace and compete, on your own.
So what I hear conceptually, John, is it's meant to be kind of a foundation builder to help get the foundation so that you can go out and be more competitive over that course of 9 years then.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so what we do when we look at the annual reports and stuff is we assess, the number of contracts you're getting through the federal government versus the number of contracts you're able to get on your own. And at some point, of course, after a period of 3 to 4 years, you want to transition from just getting federal contracts into getting more of your own contracts. And it's a transition phase. And so we look at that every year.
And one of the things, our business opportunity specialist works with these firms on a business plan. So right off the bat, they develop a business plan. We'll look at that every year to see if they need to modify it and if it's doing what it needs for them.
And I also mentioned too that
a good wrap-up question, since we're coming to the top of the hour, is, okay, you've got certified, you've gone through the gauntlet, you're so happy you did that. How do you get the word out? How do you find these opportunities?
So I think that the certification and the 8A program, that's one thing I want to differentiate real quick, is that the program is a business development program with the SBA, as John had mentioned earlier and Marla had mentioned. The certifications with women and minorities really are a marketing tool. So you're right, we do need to get those out. So they should be on the footer of your email addresses. It should be on your website. You're going to be in a corporate database that people can find you, but at the same time, you need to let people know that you're now certified as a woman or a minority-owned business. Make it prominent. Make it something that your salespeople talk about it. When you go into the supplier chat portals to upload your information, upload your certificate, check the boxes. Make sure that you have relationships with people that are in the diversity offices so that you're the first company that comes to mind when they have to increase a goal, when they're falling short. So it is very much something that you need to market, that certificate. It doesn't do any good just sitting in your drawer. Let people know that you're certified. Be proud to be a woman, minority, certified owned business.
Love it. Love it.
I was certified by WeBack, and they have, that's Washington, D.C. based. And they have a wonderful set of brown bag lunches where they bring in the corporations and the corporations present their diversity plan.
Great idea.
And yes, it's really, really very, very good. But Marla and John and Paul, is there, how do you find out if a company has a diversity program?
Well, what I typically look for when we're talking about publicly traded companies is just going on to Google search, and if you type in American Airlines diversity programs, typically those things will pop up.
Ah.
So that's a big search just to be able to do that. There are programs out there that you can also be involved with. Obviously, being part of the WBE, as you were, Tulinda, would give you access to the database of not only fellow WBEs, but also corporate sponsors. And if they're a corporate sponsor of the certification process, they probably have a certification or a supplier diversity program.
Fantastic. It's top of the hour. We probably better wrap up
Wrap
there.
this up.
Yeah.
Again,
Thank you.
everybody for participating. Thank you to our speakers.
Yeah,
Thank you to
Marla,
UMA.
John, Paul, thank you very much. And to Dr. Tulinda Larsen with UAMMI.
Thank you.
And we here at the Utah Manufacturers Association say thank you for joining us, and join us next time. We'll have more interesting content for you to help you in your business.
Thank you.